programs. They will actually be here tomorrow, supply chain, pandemic, global economy, something, I don't. But in the meantime, actually, you can scan this QR code to see our program online. It's actually just the website/agenda. You can find it tomorrow. Now, on to the main event. We are honored to have with us Alan Davidson, who is the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Communications and Information and NTIA Administrator. As everyone knows, in his current role, he's responsible for implementing the $42 billion BEAD broadband subsidy program, not to mention everything else that NTIA always also does. But of course, he's had a long and illustrious career that led him to this important, but dare I say, maybe unenviable task. He's an internet policy expert with over 20 years of experience as an executive, public interest advocate, technologist, and attorney. Prior to being appointed NTIA administrator, he was a senior advisor at the Mozilla Foundation and served in the Obama-Biden administration as the first director of digital economy at the Department of Commerce and started Google's public policy office in DC. He was director of New America's Open Technology Institute and associate director of the Center for Democracy and Technology. And to lead this interview, we're grateful to have Washington Post business reporter and author of the daily Technology 202 newsletter, which has become absolutely required reading, Cristiano Lima, who will lead the conversation and interrogate Alan, although hopefully gentle interrogation. Welcome, Alan and Cristiano. Please take it away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Oh, there we go. Great to see everyone here. Alan, we were just talking about how he just came from Alaska, so this is the second most remote place he's probably been to in the past few days.
But doesn't feel that remote.
but great to be here to chat with you at a really historic moment for the agency about some of your work. And I did want to start with the Internet for All initiative and the work you've been doing there, which I know was the focus of your recent trip. And there's a lot of questions about timetable in terms of how we'll see some of the funds begin to be or continue to be dispersed. And there was a recent study by Third Way which found that 3 in 4 voters are not even aware that the infrastructure law was passed. And I think that speaks to the fact that a lot of the aims of the legislation are long-term and that it may take a bit to see them materialize. And so I was wondering if you could talk through what you see as the timetable for when most Americans that you're looking to impact with this initiative see results and see their internet improve.
Thanks, great question. And first of all, I'll just say thank you to our organizers for having me today. And it really is great to be here back at a conference that I attended, I feel like when I was a young lawyer, or maybe at least like a younger lawyer. And it's great to see a lot of old friends here. And there is something about this conference, maybe it's some combination of like majestic views and oxygen deprivation that helps us all get out of our day-to-day and think bigger thoughts. So it really is, I was really glad to be able to come back here. And I will say, yes, this is a really historic moment for NTIA, to be at NTIA, because we are doing something really unusual. We've been talking about the digital divide in this country for over 20 years. And now, thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, we've really actually been given the resources to do something very, very serious about it. And that is a huge, huge thing. I mean, it is not often that we get tens of billions of dollars. In fact, this is probably the one shot we'll get to really close the digital divide. So to your question about timing, I mean, I think some of this is starting to happen now for a lot of people. There are a lot of different parts to these programs that are being put in place. We are, Scott mentioned our big state grant program, $42 billion, but there are a whole bunch of other programs that are in flight already. We have a giant tribal broadband connectivity program, be over $3 billion. We've given out hundreds of millions and will. Our middle mile program of $1 billion, we were getting applications that are due in September. Those programs will start rolling out next year. So there will be a longer timeline for for people to start feeling the giant state grant programs. But I think people are starting to see. I was just up in Alaska announcing a grant for a fiber deployment to a set of tribal communities. They're going to see that in the next two, as they say, the next two building seasons. So we're hopeful that this is going to happen soon. And not to go on too long on this one, but since it's such a big issue for us, I really do think the point of this is it's going to take a little while to do this. But if we do it right, this is like generations before us. They brought electricity or water to all of America, right? They built the interstate highway system. This is actually our generation's infrastructure moment. This is our generation's thing we need to do to connect everybody with what they need to succeed in the modern economy. And I think it will take time, but we will look back on this moment and say this was the moment that we did it.
You mentioned the state's program. You've gotten a lot of questions from lawmakers on Capitol Hill in terms of the interplay between the FCC's process to renew federal maps and how that's going to impact disbursement of the funding for states. There was a story in the Wall Street Journal today where you talked about some of the maps for underserved being prepared to start to inform those decisions in the first half of next year. I was wondering if you could talk through the timetable for when you see that money actually getting doled out.
Well, it's a great question because mapping is really critical. We know that, and we've been tasked with making sure that we spend this money wisely where people are unserved. And the way we know where they are unserved, we've been directed to use the FCC's maps. In the past, I think a lot of people know those maps were not very good. And I think the next iterations of these maps are going to be a lot better. And it's going to take some time, though, and so we're very focused on trying to do two things. Make sure that we move with urgency to get the maps as good as they can be as quickly as possible, but also make sure we have accuracy. And that means making sure that the maps, that states and communities who want to have a chance to kick the tires on those maps get a chance to do it. We expect the first draft of those maps sometime, the FCC chairwoman has said sort of November-ish, maybe let's say in the fall. And then we believe there'll have to be a challenge process for at least some people to be able, states to be, and communities to be able to raise issues. And so that'll put us into the first half of next year before we have the maps fully in place.
So, availability is not the same as accessibility, which affordability is a big part of that, a lot of illities in that. Wondering if you could talk through how you're thinking about the affordability piece of it. I know you mentioned this was a part of your recent trip.
Affordability is a huge element of this. It's part of the broadband infrastructure law, the bipartisan infrastructure law, I should say. A connection to somebody's family's home doesn't do them a lot of good if they can't afford the price to get online. And we know that that is true. And so we've got a number of provisions as part of what we're implementing to try to do what we can around affordability. We're going to require states to have a low-cost option. So providers who get federal money will need to have a low-cost option available for lower-income Americans. Affordability is a major factor in how states do their grant making. We've also asked states to look at what a working family middle class affordability structure would look like. And that's going to vary a lot from state to state. But I just have to say, I was just up in Alaska. It is incredible to talk to people up there about the challenges they're facing. Affordability is a giant piece of it. I was in a remote native community, accessible only by boat or plane. I talked to a 64-year-old grandmother who'd lived there her whole life. And it's not that they don't have the internet, it's that it's very slow and absolutely unaffordable. And she pays regularly, this woman Faith, 64 years old, pays $700 or $800 a month for her internet bill. She was showing me the internet bill. And it's a lot of it's overage charges that they pay. This was not uncommon. Everywhere we went, we heard these stories about bills that honestly, here in the lower 48, we would be shocked for a family to pay those bills. And they're paying them because they really, really need the internet. We've got to do something about affordability, and I think it's going to have to be, certainly that's an egregious example, but it's very common up in Alaska, and that's we're going to have to find a solution for it up there. And everywhere.
Circling back to the mapping question for a second, I'm wondering what you see as sort of the most glaring gaps in information at the moment, and what the path is to rectifying that.
On the maps?
Yes.
Well, up until now, I think people who follow this really closely would say, it's been the granularity of the maps, right? We built these maps looking at, I think, mostly census blocks, right? And if you had service in a census block anywhere, it was considered to have service everywhere. And we know that's not really good enough for the modern era, especially when we're making decisions about allocations of billions of dollars. So I think probably the biggest thing we need is more granularity in these maps, and we'll get it. It's a question of how fast we can get it. And all I'll say is if you're here and you work for a provider who needs to provide information to the FCC to get these maps done this summer, please get your information in soon. We really need it. And I'll also add the other piece of it, which is nobody is eligible for funding under the state grant program, no provider, if they haven't provided their data. So the carrot and the stick, there we are.
So wanted to touch on a couple other topics. I did want to just plug very quickly that we're going to save about 10 minutes at the end to field audience from the questions for Alan. So start thinking those up, and we'll have microphones come out to you. I wanted to shift to questions about data privacy. The agency has done listening sessions around privacy and civil rights and equity and these issues, and this is something that has gained new life on Capitol Hill in recent months. And I was wondering if you see the agency having a more active role going forward in those discussions, and what that might look like.
I think so, and I hope so. And I think the backdrop of all of this is something everybody here knows, which is that we need to do more to protect people's privacy in this country. We are long overdue in having a strong national privacy law. Jane Horvath is applauding here. I really think that if we were here at this conference, 10 or 15 years ago, and had taken a poll of all of us in the audience and said, who thinks that by 2022 we'll have some kind of privacy law in the books, I think a lot of people would have raised their hands. It is, as somebody who's been in this space for a long time, it is surprising that we do not have it, and people need it. And it also is not great for our credibility internationally. There's a lot of different reasons why we need to do this, but it's mostly about people and making sure that they have the protections that they ought to have online. And I'd say I feel it quite a bit when I go think about the fact that we're going to be bringing, high-speed internet to millions of more people in the coming years, and making sure that they know how to protect their privacy and security online is going to be important. So I'm hopeful that NTIA will have a stronger role in this too. We serve as the President's advisor on telecommunications and information policy. This administration is showing already that it cares pretty deeply about this issue. We did this listening session. We're about to put out soon our own RFC around privacy, because I think the digital equity issues there and civil rights issues are quite unusual and big.
So you touched on the need for a national federal framework. There's a dynamic developing currently where the House is advancing a comprehensive, sort of so-called proposal that includes protections for children, whereas the Senate just advanced an expansion for just children's privacy protections. And there are some differing opinions between lawmakers of where the focus should lie and what might be attainable within the year. I was wondering what your thoughts are on that, and where folks should be focusing their efforts.
Well, I'll just say, first of all, the administration hasn't taken a position on any of these particular bills yet, so it would be premature for me to opine on any particular piece of legislation. I think you're hearing a bipartisan view that we need to be working on both. And I think you've heard from people have heard from the administration, this is something the president cares deeply about. He spoke about children's privacy, for example, in the State of the Union address. It's in the executive order on competition from last year. The FTC is moving forward. So nobody should be surprised to see the administration try and find all the tools in the toolkit that we can. And that'll include the work we're going to try and do at NTIA.
On the competition front, it's been just over a year since President Biden signed the executive order around competition, and that directed NTIA to conduct a study looking at competition in the mobile app ecosystem. I was wondering if you might be able to say what's the status of that and what can we expect from that report?
Obviously, increasing competition in the American economy is a huge priority for this administration. NTIA was given a task out of the executive order from last year to do a study and a paper on competition in the mobile app ecosystem. And we did a request for comments, got over 150 excellent comments, thanks to those who submitted with us. And there were a lot of thoughts and recommendations about policies. And we are putting together our output from that process. It's actually in the review process within the administration. And I think we will be talking about some of the policy options that we heard in the comments that we got, because it's quite clear that there are opportunities to increase competition and ensure that we're making sure there aren't undue barriers to entry for innovators in the app ecosystem.
Any initial takeaways, though, from the comments or from your own experience?
It would be a little premature to state what's in the report, but I would say, I think it's not a surprise that that we heard a lot from innovators in the space who are concerned about what they see as a highly concentrated market right now.
We're actually winding down on time a little bit, and so again, just prime those questions. I wanted to take a little bit of a step back. We've heard from many lawmakers in recent years concerns that the U.S. has ceded its place in terms of setting rules for the internet more broadly. And of course, NTIA as an advisory agency serves a key role in sort of helping to shape administration policy on that. But do you share that concern that the U.S. is ceding that role, and what do you see as the path to addressing that, if so?
I think it's a terrific point. I think 20 years ago, we had a very, very strong case to make around the world about our leadership in a lot of different areas around privacy, our approach to multi-stakeholder approaches to to internet governance, our approaches to platforms. All of that made a lot more sense to people around the world 20 years ago, and we've got a lot of work to do here still. But I think the bigger picture is that we are still in a battle around the world between open and closed societies, between people who have a vision of an open internet where people can communicate freely and can have access to information and ultimately can have the tools they need to protect their privacy, versus a much more closed and authoritarian vision that is still out there that would try to bifurcate the internet or balkanize the internet, that would restrict data flows, that would censor people. And that is a very, very active fight that we are seeing happening every day. So we need to engage, and we need to be putting the resources into making sure that we are part of that international conversation. We still have, and I say we, I would say the West has a compelling argument about what the internet can and should be, and we need to keep pressing it. We'll be pressing it at the ITU, at the big plenipotentiary that's happening at the end of September. We need to press it in the multi-stakeholder forums. We need to press it with our allies, and I think we're ultimately on the right side of history, but there's work to do.
Great. Well, on that note, I'd love to turn it over to you all, and for whoever might have questions for Alan. And I believe we have a mic running around, so if you just raise your hand, we can come to you. We have someone up here in the front. I see one over here in the front.
Richard Bennett, High Tech Forum. I just did a podcast with Anna Gomez in which she explained that she believes we need a national spectrum plan. Can kind of build on the one that Blair did that actually had a large spectrum component. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
It's a great question, and I would say we do need a national spectrum strategy, and it's something this administration and NTIA are working on already. And one thing that's, NTIA, part of our role is we serve as the manager of and coordinator of federal spectrum usage, but we also have this kind of dual imperative to also make sure that our spectrum's being used efficiently, wisely, and making sure that we're feeding the continued need for spectrum in the commercial space. And that's the only way we're going to have the most competitive wireless industry in the world, which we need. And I think to do that, we need to have a strong strategy. I'd just say I think you'll be seeing more coming from us on that. The starting point for us has been better coordination at the federal level. I'm doing a lot of work with my counterpart, Chairwoman Rosen-Warzel, on this score. And we've had a great working relationship, just put out a spectrum coordination initiative earlier this year, just put out an update to our memorandum of understanding, which hadn't been updated in almost 20 years. So those are just the first steps. And you're right on, we need a bigger strategy that really addresses the broader issues.
Other questions?
Sure. Thank you for talking to us here today. By the way, I'm Ed Hurst at Astra. And NTIA is a tough job. I'm glad you're doing it. They have the benefit of your experience and knowledge. Spectrum's an interesting issue. It's going to be addressed on the panel later today. I wanted to follow on what you said about coordination of spectrum. And now that you've been in the job, do you think the current U.S. government structure is adequate for that purpose on spectrum and more broadly? Or do you think we should perhaps think about changing it? Back in the 70s, they had an Office of Telecommunications Policy in the White House. That was then folded into NTIA and created there. But do you think that we need a more central thing, sort of like our colleague from Canada has, to control not just spectrum but telecom, and then we could lead the world better in that way, as you were referring to?
Well, I think I still run the Office of Telecom Policy. I mean, it is part of NTIA, and that is our statutory authority. I will say we need to do a better job than we've been doing. And, we've seen, front pages of paper kinds of disputes happening around spectrum, and that's not good. When my mom knows about spectrum disputes, that's a big problem, actually. So, but those of you, many of you have been working in this space for a long, long time and know it very, very well. I think from my perspective right now, it's too early to tell. We are going to push for to see what we can get out of this system. And that starts with better coordination. I think we've got the backing of the White House to do it. I think the federal agencies that we're working with want to do better. And so I'm hopeful. And we know, I think working with all folks in the commercial space, I think there's a lot of people who understand this needs to happen better than it's maybe been happening. And so, we're going to push it. We're going to push it and see.
You have a question over here?
Hey, I'm going to surprise you and ask you not a question not on spectrum. I'd love to talk about data and the need to move past what I think is the existing privacy debate. Consumers are incredibly important, of course, and we have to get to a point where the culture of using data is understood. But if we don't get to that culture, there's a huge amount of things that data, massive amounts of data can do that can help our lives, help our infrastructure, help our economy do better. For example, if the federal government could simply get our health records together in a way that actually was really useful, should NTIA have a part in that? And I also want to point out, NTIA is an agency that I respect hugely. Thank you for taking on the leadership of an agency that punches way above its weight and takes on some of the hard questions. But this data for good is a huge question, and I'd love to know your thoughts on this.
Well, I'll just say that this is exactly why we need good rules of the road around privacy. Because if we have them, it unlocks the ability for people to trust in those systems and to have data usage for good. Think of the things we can do with data, right? Healthcare is just the tip of the iceberg, and autonomous systems, the things we're building with AI, they all rely on data, but I will tell you, we are not in a sustainable spot right now. And, if we don't get I think we need to get our act together on privacy, or we won't be able to realize the potential. And I fully believe that we can write good privacy rules that protect consumers and also allow for innovation. And there's been reasons why many people in industry have supported regulation in this space for a long time, because I think responsible players understand that by putting good rules of the road and guardrails in place, we free up a lot of possibilities for innovation, because we take off the bad behaviors that really scare and worry people. So I would just say, if you're interested in using data for good, you should also be a supporter of strong privacy legislation and making sure that we have good rules of the road, because we are not in a good sustainable place right now, and we can do a lot better. So stay tuned for more on that one too. Great question, thank you.
So I think we have time for one or two more questions. Oh, over here.
Going back to some of your international comments, I've heard it said that sometimes the US government is actually frustrated that American industry is not taking some of the threats seriously enough when it's China's new IP or standards bodies or the like. I just wonder if that's sort of a true perception and what you think we could do to change that. And sort of kind of staying on that general topic, more specifically, other countries around the world seem to be leading on Open RAN, and I'm curious what your thinking is there, especially now that Congress has given you a pot of money to do something on that.
Great points, and I would say two things to reflect on. On the bigger picture question, I think there is a need for us to be, I don't want to comment on where we've been necessarily, but I will say these issues of engagement at places like the ITU are fully on the radar screen now. We're in the middle of for example, an election for the Secretary General of the ITU. This is a pretty big deal. And the candidate who the US government supports, Doreen Bogdan-Martin, she's an American, she's got nearly 2 decades of experience, she's amazing, she's also a wonderful human being. And she will be great as Secretary General. Also would be a historic pick, the first woman to be Secretary General of the ITU, which is kind of incredible that in 150-ish years. Her opponent is a Russian former Huawei executive. It's sort of like we can't really write that script better. But I will say we're putting a huge amount of energy right now in the U.S. government, across the government, to engage at places like the ITU more, to support Doreen's candidacy. And by the way, I would say for folks who are engaged at the ITU and with other countries on this, we really appreciate the support of the private sector on this one. It's going to be important. The election's September 29th, I think it is, yes. I'll just really quickly say, on your second point about Open RAN, it's a great example. I was going to say about the examples of things we can be doing and should be doing more. So, 5G equipment security is extremely important. Making sure there's more diversity in the vendor space is really something that we want to encourage. Open RAN is a huge path to that, and I was excited to see in the CHIPS Act that just passed, NTIA has received $1.5 billion for a Spectrum Innovation Fund, or a public wireless, I'm going to get the term wrong, Public Wireless Innovation Fund. We're going to be focused quite a bit on what we can do to unlock and catalyze more work on Open RAN and the challenges that it has. It's things like that have, I will say, bipartisan support now on Capitol Hill in the administration. I think those are going to be very important to be looking to lean in on efforts like that in this era of kind of global competition that we're in right now.
One last taker? One more? Well, if not, we'll leave it at that. Alan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you all for being here, and looking forward to a great event.
Great to see everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan. That was really great. I want you all to remember, if you ever do, the next time you do hear Alan, you will never hear him again with a techno beat. So thank you so much, Cristiano. Just quickly, tomorrow morning we're going to start at 8. And even though we don't have the actual glossy program, what? Oh, okay. There are like flyers with the program up here if you want them. There they are. So everybody have a good time, and we'll see you tomorrow.